Good evening, everyone. And tonight is our first class on Megillat Ruth, the Book of Ruth, right? And it's Megillat Ruth. It's a scroll because we do also write it in scrolls, but because it is included in the Ketuvim, in the writings, and not in the prophets. So I'd like to say just a word about that before we start. Oh, I see my. Just a second. I need to shut a door here. Okay, now to be quieter. All right. So it's included in the Ketuvim, in the writings. And what that's an indication of is that it didn't make it into kind of the prophetic canon. The Jewish Tanakh we have the 5 books of Moses, right, the Pentateuch, then we have the prophets, and then we have the Ketuvim, the writings. Now that's what we call the Judean Bible. That's what the Jews of Judea, that was their Tanakh, their Bible. But if you go, for example, the Alexandrian Jews, they just had everything in one collection. They did distinguish between the 5 books of Moses and the rest of the Bible, but they didn't make the same division between the prophets and the writings. So with them, where are you going to find Ruth in the Septuagint, in the Greek Bible? That was essentially what the Alexandrian Jews used. You're going to find it after Judges, right? You're going to find it after the book of Judges. Why are you going to find it after the book of Judges? Because it starts, and it was when the judges judged, or the chieftains judged, whatever you want to call it, shoftim. That's the time period it's in. So if you're like, okay, here we have a historical book, where are we going to put it? We'll put it next to the book of Judges, right? Whereas our Bible, our Tanakh, which has that division, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, Torah, prophets, writings, because Ruth was added later, it was kind of joined later, possibly composed later, it was added with the writings, right? So with Esther, with Mishlei, Proverbs. Now it actually does connect to the end of Proverbs, because the end of Proverbs we have what chapter? We have Eshet Chayil, the virtuous woman. And Ruth is in many ways exemplifies the virtuous woman. Right, and also and Josephus, I believe, even talks about how she kind of exemplifies this virtuous woman, and we're going to see that as the book progresses. There are many connections between the Book of Ruth and other biblical books. We're going to discuss this as we go. So the way I'd like to kind of tackle the Book of Ruth is really to dive right in, and that's why I wanted to say this about the Book of Ruth before, where it comes in the Bible before we start. Because a lot of what's interesting about the book will come up as we read, all right? Are there any questions before we start just about what we said so far? You can always add questions in the chat, I'll see them, or you can ask them. Okay, no questions. All right, so I'm going to share my screen with the text in English and Hebrew. Okay, so I'm using Safaria. I'll share my screen. Okay, everyone should see my screen with the beginning of the Book of Ruth in Hebrew and English. Yes? Okay. So we begin. Vayihi b'mei shvot hashoftim, vayihi ra'av ba'aretz, vayelech ish mibet lechem Yehuda, lagur b'sdei Moav, hu v'ishto u'shnei banav. It was in the time of, and you know what? There's something I forgot to discuss, but I will discuss it briefly now. Why do we read Ruth in Shavuot, right? Why do we read this book during this coming holiday? Okay.
The time of Tzilchitim.
Right.
The time of Tzilchitim. Sorim.
It's Sorim and Tzilchitim, right? It's the time of the barley harvest, right? That is specifically the time of Shavuot, right? Which is the end of, right? So it's the barley harvest, also we'll have the wheat harvest. That is the time of Shavuot. And in fact, we do see that we have a tradition from the time of the Gonim. The Gonim is the first time we have the tradition mentioned of, in fact, learning and reading, or rather reading Ruth, the Book of Ruth, on the holiday of Shavuot. So it goes back pretty far. Without the connection, later on we get the connection made to Matan Torah specifically, to the giving of the Torah, right? Where we have, for example, in Ruth Rabbah, which is the Midrash Rabbah on the Book of Ruth, talks a lot about the giving of the Torah. It's a Midrash, especially says the giving of the Torah, because this is when it's being read. Also, the Midrash, I believe it's Midrash Lekach Tov, that says, why is the Book of Ruth read on the day of the giving of the Torah? Because the Book of Ruth is all chesed, is all overwhelming kindness, and so is Torah. Torah is also all chesed, all overwhelming kindness. Now, the truth is, this idea of being tremendously kind and generous is a theme that we're going to see throughout the Book of Ruth. Almost everyone's doing this. Almost everyone is either being kind or really kind, being okay or super great, okay? It's a very positive book. There aren't any real villains in the Book of Ruth. Everyone's a good guy, okay? And we're going to talk about that as we come, like even like the bad people, like the worst people are worse because they're not incredibly kind, right? It's them, and then there's the incredibly kind person. There's Orpah who wants to go with her mother-in-law, but her mother-in-law is like, look, you're just gonna, I can't do anything for you, and this is just not a good idea. So then she goes, and Ruth doesn't even care, like she's just over. But Orpah was a perfectly nice, what she did was also more than one would expect, or the Ploni Almoni, the guy who is the redeemer of the field, and he's like, sure, I'll redeem the field, and he's like, well, then you've got to take the wife, and he's like, look, I can't do that. I can't just take another wife. It's gonna, mess things up. Like, that's an understandable reaction. That's not, person doesn't just walk in expecting to buy a field and come out with a wife, right? But Boaz is this tremendously generous person who wants to provide for Ruth, and also is attracted to what a good person she is. And we're going to see that this constant refrain of what a good person Ruth is, but also other people. Naomi also, we're going to see this running theme of people who want to take care of each other or just being decent people. Okay, so it's a very positive and calm book to be happening during the time of the Judges. Because if you read the Book of Judges, Shoftim, right? If you read the Book of Judges, it's a time of constant battles and turmoil. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, but is Elimelech kind? I mean, Chazal likes to say that he's not kind.
Okay. So I'm talking about the also Chazal say bad things about, Orpah. They say bad things about Ploni Almoni. Why don't we know his name? Because it was so shameful that he didn't take Ruth, right? Mm-hmm. So once you come to kind of the rabbinic interpretation, it's true. Certainly Elimelech gets a bad rap. The story is and also there's the idea that the sons marrying Moabite women, like they wouldn't have dared to do it while their father was alive, that kind of thing. Like there's all sorts of negative things that are brought in the interpretation. But in the plain meaning of the book, and again, it is kind of going back to the original. Like I grew up thinking, that she kind of sucks. She went back and Ruth stayed with Naomi, right? But the fact is, you're not really supposed to think that she's bad. You're supposed to say, wow, she was really good, and even she gave up, but Ruth kept going, right? So you're supposed to see that everyone's really trying to do what they're supposed to do in general in the book. Now, Elimelech also, it's the thing. So let's dive back in. Here we go. Okay. All right. Vayhi meshvot hashoftim. Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz. Vayelech ish mi Bethlehem Yehuda lagur b'snei Moab hu v'ishto u'shnei banav. And it was the time of the judging of the judges, or when the chieftains ruled. This will have it. Okay. That's actually a better translation, because they're not just judges, they're rulers. And there was a famine in the land. Now, these words introduce it when Abraham goes changes lands to seek food. When Yitzchak leaves the land to seek food. That's how it introduces it. Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz was a famine in the land, and therefore it's actually fairly understandable that someone might feel that they had to leave. It's still considered a little bit unusual because everyone else seems to stay. And it says, Vayelech ish mi Bethlehem Yudah lagur b'stei Moab, hu v'ishto shnei banav. So a man goes from Bethlehem, that is in Judea, in Judah, to live or dwell temporarily in the field of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. Okay. So he goes there. Why would he go to Moab? Why would Moab have a better time during a drought? Because you would understand going to Egypt, because Egypt is not dependent on rainfall. Why would he go to Moab? Actually, someone wrote an article finding that you would actually have a lot more rainfall in Moab than you would in the area of Bethlehem. So it actually would make a certain amount of sense. Now we get to find out who these people are. And find out, and it'll be important, even though Elimelech is maybe less important. B'shem ish Elimelech, b'shem ishto Naomi, b'shem shnei banav Machlon v'chilyon Ephratim, mi Bethlehem Yehuda, v'yavo state Moab v'yusha. So this man is Elimelech. His wife's name is Naomi. His 2 sons are named according to their end, Machlon v'chilyon. Now these are actually names. Like it's not supposed to be so weird that they've got these names. Machlon from Machlon, we automatically think of sickness, but there are similar names in biblical names. Chilyon, we actually have a very similar name in Ugaritic. So these are names, but to have one named sickness and the other, destruction, or that nothing good is going to happen to these guys. And the truth is, they can have these very fateful names because they're not going to play a role later on in the book. They're just going to die. So they have these fateful names. Ephratim, they're from Ephrata of Bethlehem, right? In Judah. Vayavos de Moab, so they come to the field of Moab. That's where they are. Okay. Vayamat Elimelech ish Nomi, so her husband dies, Elimelech dies, and it's just her and her 2 sons. And then they marry 2 Moabite women. Ve'yisulam nashim Moabiyot, shem hachat Orpah, shem hashenit Ruth, ve'shvu sham ke'eser shanim. Okay, so they marry Moabite women. One is Orpah, one is Ruth, and they dwell there 10 years. Now here we get to our first problem. You can say legal problem with the book, which is how could they marry Moabite women? Okay, so if we're familiar, here now on your screens is Dvarim Chaf Gimel, that's Deuteronomy 23, verse 4, Pasuk Dalet. Lo yavo Amoni uMoavi bikal Adonai gam dor asiri lo yavo lahem bikal Adonai adolam. You should not allow an Ammonite or a Moabite into the congregation of God, right? Even to the 10th generation. And never will you. In the 10th generation, it's really meant to be like no one's counting 10 generations since they've been a Moabite. The idea is pretty much never, right? You can't say if they know the parents Moabite, forget it, right? Why? Because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt, and because they hired Bilam, son of Beor, right? If anyone wants to hear a great Dubner Maggid kind of vort, kind of like little word of Torah on this, ask me. It's terrific, but I'm not going to say it because it's being way off topic here. But there's a great little, the question is, why did he said, I can give you a parable for the question on this verse, and I can give you a parable for the answer on this verse. And he does. The question on the verse, namely being if the thing, if why when you start with hiring Bill, isn't it worse to hire someone to curse you than to not give you food and water? And he's got an answer for it. But the truth is, the idea of not meeting you with food and water on your journey is a possible life-threatening thing, right? And the idea is we have a connection to these people, and also it would have been right and generous to give us food on the way, but also there's this time we're kind of cousins, and they didn't do it, and so forget it. They don't come in now. And we know, and this is one of the reasons that some give for why do we have the Book of Ruth? Why is it centering on, why do we have a book that's centering on a Moabite woman who enters the community of God? And the answer is the answer is that there's this kind of conflict, particularly in the Persian period, in terms of what should the status of a woman from another nation who marries into Israel, what should her status be? horrible? Do you have to get rid of her? Or should you accept her? Can she be an asset, right, to the Jewish people? Can she be great? Like, and the answer, of course, in the Book of Ruth is yes. If you have a woman who's freely accepting, saying, yes, I will be with you. Your God is my God. Your people is my people, then that can be a wonderful person. And what's interesting is what we'll see also, I mean, if you look at kind of what is their sin here, right? That they're hiring someone to curse, they hired someone to curse you, they didn't give you food and water. We see from Ruth's generosity that she is absolutely not of that ilk. Also, if we look at, for example, in Numbers 25, Numbers 25 says Bamidbar Chaf Hey, and that's what you'll see on your screen now, right? And this is right after Bilam does not, in fact, curse Israel. Right afterwards, Israel is in Shittim, and the men have relations with the women of Moab, and the women of Moab induce them to worship idols, to worship foreign gods, right? And Ruth is tremendously modest. And she is absolutely considers herself allegiant to God. We'll see how often she said, she is with the people of Israel. She is with the God of Israel. So that also is a contrast to what this would say about Moabite women. And to see that this is it was a live conflict in the time of the Persian period, we can look here now. You'll see on your screens, Nehemiah 13, Nehemiah Yud Gimel, right? Where Nehemiah, here it says, on that day, B'yamahu nikra b'sefer Moshe b'osnei ha'am, v'nimsa katuv bo, asher lo yavo Amoni u'Moavi b'kal Elohim ad olam. On that day, they read in the book of Moses, in the ears of the people, and they found written in it that an Ammonite and a Moabite shall not come into the community of God forever, right? And when they heard it, they said, oh, we've got to separate, right? So that's the opposite side, right? Saying, no, you married someone from the wrong people, keep the Torah, get rid of them. Now, I want to remind you that there is no such thing really as set conversion, right? Until the closest thing we have to a mention of that is perhaps talking about conversion is in Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, where it says that many of the people are mityahadim, which either means they're becoming Jewish or they pretend to be Jewish because of their fear of what's going to happen on Purim, right? Because at this point, the Jews can defend themselves, and so many of the people are mityahadim. Now that that becoming Jewish or pretending to be Jewish, it's absolutely possible that it simply means pretending. The hitpael verb form can absolutely mean to pretend to. So it could be that also that's not recognizing a conversion, but rather a pretense. So it's now we know that, of course, the Hasmoneans forcibly converted nations. And we know that once you get to the Hasmonean period, there's absolutely a concept of conversion, right? So the question is, but it seems like in the stories about Ezra and Nehemiah, there's no recognition that there's a legitimate way to bring these women into the fold. It's like, are you for foreign marriages? Are you not for foreign marriages? Whereas here in the Book of Ruth, it seems like there absolutely is, right? There is a way to say this person has allegiance to our people and our God. And I think it really just does, of course it comes through. It's not, I don't think it's the only theme of the book, but certainly how wonderful Ruth is and how much she becomes kind of a part of the nation of Israel, a part of, of Judah is I think part of the theme of the book. So if we look at, and I'll once again share my screen. So how of course is this explained by rabbinic interpretation is, and here we see the Mishnah Yevamot, and it could very well be that this is the opinion that the Book of Ruth is reflecting, as opposed to like anyone can convert. Well, women from Moab can convert, and that's what this says. Ammoni and Moabite, I'll just read the English. Ammonite and Moabite converts are prohibited from entering into their congregation and marrying a woman who was born Jewish, and their prohibition is eternal. However, their female counterparts, even the convert herself, are permitted immediately. In other words, if you have someone like Ruth, she's a woman, it doesn't matter where she comes from. She can, well, it does matter because we see afterwards that if she were from Edom or from Egypt, that she would not be able to, in fact, convert, which is kind of funny because the Hasmoneans forcibly converted Edomites. So I'm not exactly sure, what that says, but whether this is actually saying something about the Hasmoneans as well. But that's the if you anyone who remembers learning, learning Ruth in Jewish day school will remember that well, they could marry them. You were not they could marry them, because it was generally, the way I always learned it was that the sons had done something wrong. They married Moabite women, right? But these Moabite women could convert because they were women, right? And so they could convert. But here it's not really addressed. The whole issue isn't addressed. So we just have to kind of follow the story and see how kind of terrific these women are, right? That these women are very kind women who kind of go along with Naomi. So anyway, so they take these women, they live with them for 10 years, and then and both of them died. This is actually to emphasize the tragedy that's befalling Naomi. Okay, I'm going to read the verse again. And both of them died. It doesn't just say Machlon and Chilion died. And both of them also died. Machlon and Chilion. And the woman remained without her two little boys and her husband. And I translated that on purpose because you usually don't call a grown man a yelid, a child, right? But it's to emphasize this tragedy. She has lost her husband and her two children, and here she is in a farmland, okay? Okay, so she gets up, and she and her daughters-in-law, and she comes back from Moab because she heard while she was in Moab that God has remembered his people and has given them bread. This is one of the places where we see kind of what we call hashgacha, God's looking or watching over kind of the characters in our story, right? It's in general, it's all kind of behind the scenes. Everyone acts, and the idea that God is kind of helping things along. But at any rate, now the family is over. So she's like, okay, I've got nothing in Moab. I'm going home. Why her two daughters-in-law are going with her is not immediately clear because they are both Moabite women. So she left, she goes out, her two daughters-in-law are with her. They're walking on the path to return to the land of Yehuda. You want to see a nice feminine plural. This is one of the places to go, right? We're kind of going to have a lot of feminine plurals here because women going together. And we very much in this story have a lot of cases where the spotlight's on women. We take it for granted because we're modern people. You don't get this a lot in biblical stories where it's really women who are talking to each other. It's where a biblical book that passes the what's the name of it? The Benheim test. There's a test where are two women talking together in this movie not about a man, right? And if they are, then it passes the test. But if they're not, then it's not women. It's not particularly women focused. But in this case, we absolutely see it's a story really is focused on Naomi and Ruth. It really is. They're the protagonists in this story, and we're supposed to really feel with them. ותאמר נעמי לשתי חלותיה, לכנה שובנה, אישה לבית אמה, יעש אדוני עמכם חסד כאשר עשיתם עם המתים ועם הדין. She's like, girls, go. She doesn't say girls. She says, daughters-in-law, go back, go return. Each one go to her mother's house may God do kindness with you, just as you did with those who died, in other words, with your husbands and with me. Yiten Adonai lachem u'mitzena menucha isha beit isha v'tishak lehem v'tisena kolam v'tekena. She said, may God give you peace, each woman in the house of her husband. In other words, she's like, don't stay with me. Build your own houses. I want your good, right? And again, Naomi also is kind, right? I just want your good. I am asking my God to give you what you need, which is go and have your own house with your husband, right? And she kisses them and they cry. But Tomar la ki itach nashuv lamech. Like, no, we're going to go back with you to your people. Right? Very short answer. No, we're going with you to your people. But Tomar Naomi, shov nabotai, she's repeating, go back, my daughters. Lama telachna imi. Why should you go with me? Ha'odli banim b'me'ai vayulachem lanashim. Do I still have sons inside me that you can have for husbands? And then she repeats, Shovna v'notai lechna. Go return my daughters. Return my daughters. Go. Ki zakanti miyot leish. Ki amati yesh li tikva. Gam leiti halayla leish v'gam melati banim. She's like, I'm too old to have a husband. And even if I said, you know what, I've got a hope of having a husband, and I had someone tonight, and I had sons. Halahenti saberna. Are you going to wait for them to grow up? Are those the ones who are gonna provide for you with you not having a husband? Don't do this, my daughters. This dress of my lot is more bitter than yours. I actually like to. It is, my law is more bitter than yours, but also my bitterness would be from you as well. In other words, if you came and you gave up your future for me, I would also have bitterness from you because God's hand is against me. Now, everyone in the story is going to see kind of God's hand in things, and Naomi sees God's hand in her for bad. Very much, it's very kind of, just a second, I'll get the questions in just a moment. It's very kind of Jobian. Right? Job loses his sons. He loses he's struck by sickness, and he says God has it in for me. Right? I haven't done anything wrong. God has it in for me. She has lost everything. Right? She doesn't have money, as we'll see. She doesn't have her sons. She's coming back with nothing, and she has no hope. And she says, God is clearly against me. You should not be with me. I am praying to God that you will do well where you go. Okay, questions? Yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Go for
it. Does other Mideastern cultures have the idea of yibum, of if someone dies and there's no children, that the widow marries a brother? Because this story really strikes me now. And when did it get to be that after 10 years you could divorce a woman if she didn't have children? Is that
that's something else? I think that's rabbinic. I don't think it's biblical. No. And also what we're going to see in the Book of Ruth is not yibum. It's not classical yibum, because classical yibum, I should say it's not the yibum that we have in the books of Moses, in the Torah, right? It's not that yibum, because that yibum is specifically brothers. If you're her cousin, there's no reason for you to marry her, and she doesn't have to marry you. Okay, it's not that. What we have in this book are two different things that are kind of meshed together. I did see an article that I thought gave a pretty good hypothesis for what this actually is connected to, and I'll talk to it when we get there in the book, right? But we've got two ideas that are kind of driving the story. One is something that seems connected to Yibum, which is this idea of the wife of the man who didn't have any sons, and now she's a widow, and she needs to marry someone to have the name of the dead be put on his portion, right? That idea, and yet that seems to be specifically for brothers and not move any farther from that, and that's not the case here. And the idea of redeeming land, where also, this does not seem to go along with that rule that we're familiar with, both from the Torah and from the story with Jeremiah, where Jeremiah has to redeem his cousin's land, which also is, that story itself is also has some strange aspects. But never do we see in those other stories that the redemption of land is connected to marrying a woman. Right? So we're going to discuss this later when we get to it, but we have these two ideas that are kind of meshed in this story and do drive the story forward. And I don't know. I mean, and also there's this idea that and what's interesting is, as we'll see, Naomi is the inheritor. She inherits everything. Rabbinically, she wouldn't have. Rabbinically, she would not have inherited her sons and husband. She would not have inherited the property that she inherits here. But it does seem from actual contracts, etc., it does seem that women did inherit in Jewish circles, certainly in the Second Temple period. So it's not that unusual that she inherits the land here. But let's go back to our text. So now she says, my lot is more, God's against me. Please, there's nothing left I can give you. Please go and find husbands and be happy, right? So they both cry again, and then Orpah kisses her mother-in-law, and Ruth clings to her. All right, so we're supposed to understand that Orpah left. Orpah kissed her and left. Maybe it doesn't say she left, just says she kissed her, but Ruth stuck to her. Vatomer, hine shava yivimtech. This is our last argument, okay? The last argument is, look, your sister-in-law did go back, right? She knows what she's doing. El amav el Eloha, to her nation and to her God. Shuvi acharei yivimtech, go back after your sister-in-law. And the assumption, the underlying implication here is she's going back to her nation and her God. You need to go back to your nation and your God. Take a lesson from her, because I'm going back to my nation and my God, right? And Ruth's going to pick that up, and that's why she's going to argue the way she argues in return. Chanel, you have a question? No? Okay.
Miriam says, when is the word Yevimeche, sister-in-law?
What?
Since when is the word, like the word Yevama, does it mean sister-in-law in other places in the Bible or in Hebrew?
Here, so in Deuteronomy 25, 7 and 9, Dvarim, yes, we have it with Yibum. Is your sister-in-law, in other words, your brother's widow.
But over there it's the reverse, because when you Yavem issue, you make her your wife. Like Liaven is to make her your wife, not to make her your sister-in-law.
Here, here I'll show you just a second. Let me go to the verse. Just a sec. Go. Okay. Okay, you can all still see my screen, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, so here. Okay, so the man doesn't want to take his sister-in-law, okay? So here it's a general, they're melding, right? It's the two brothers. So she's the sister-in-law, I guess, to the brother and the brother's wife, right? Same way we do today. Same way we do today. So that's really where we have it, and it is connected. Is it connecting it to Hebrew, or is this is just the word, right? This is just the word that you would use, right? If you had what is the? It's a cross kind of Ugaritic. We have it in Ugaritic. We have it in Syriac. So it's not an unusual word for sister-in-law. Okay, I'm back to our text. All right. So here, So she's like, go back. And the argument she uses now is, she went back to her nation and her God. You should go back to your nation, your God. And she's implying, and I'm going to my nation and my God, right? Vatomer Ruth al tifki'i bi lo azvech lashuv me'acharayich ki el asher tochi elech uvasher talini alin amech ami ve'elohayich Elohai. So Ruth says, don't press me to leave you and to return from behind, to go back, because I will go whichever way you go. Wherever you sleep, I will sleep. And that language, wherever you sleep, I will sleep, means I know you don't even necessarily know where you're going to stay, right? I know you've got nothing. Wherever you sleep, I will sleep. Your nation is my nation, and your God is my God. Basher tamuti amut, right? Wherever you die, I will die. V'sham ekaver, and I will be buried there. Basher tamuti amut v'sham ekaver. Ko yaseh Adonai li v'cho yosif ki hamavet yafrid beni uvenech. So should the Lord do to me, and so should he continue, because death will separate between me and you. And she's deliberately saying, this is my God, right? I can invoke God, right? So will God do to me, and so will he continue, because death will separate us. Because now your nation is my nation, your God is my God. I remember, by the way, I went to the kibbutz Revadim, and I was staying there. And at night, I took a little walk around the kibbutz, and I saw this guy, this older guy, kind of on a bench with an older woman with a helper. And I started talking to him, and he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was started telling me the whole story about, how he survived the camps. And essentially, he had a couple of very good friends where they were helping each other. He was on the death march, and he had somehow managed to steal or whatever new shoes, but they didn't fit, and he couldn't walk in them. And he's like, they said, "What are you doing?" And if you stumbled, you died. So they each one of them kind of lifted him up by the sides, by each side, until he said someone was shot for falling behind. And then he's like, he had no problem walking, he could walk then. But then, and he's like, and he and his friends were helping each other through the camps. And then when the war was over, he said, I had no connection to Israel. He said, but they were Zionists. And he said, and I was like Ruth. I said, where your nation is my nation, your God is my God, where you go, I'll go, right? And that's how he ended up. He ended up actually originally in Kfar, right? And when Kfar was wiped out, he went to Revadim. So it's and that's that kind of belonging and saying, no matter what, we're going to be together. We're going to get through this together, is something that resonates, I think, in so many ways. So I could not share this story. I had to. So at this point, Nomi realizes, once she makes the speech, Nomi's like, okay, we're just decided to go with me. That's it. Okay. And she saw that she saw how determined she is to go with her. And she stopped not talking to her, but she stopped arguing with her to go back. She's like, you know what? If this is she's made her argument, she's made her decision, I will accept it. Okay. But
she doesn't sound so happy. She doesn't sound so happy that she's coming back.
Well, you know what? I mean, and I actually think that the point is that Naomi really wants these young women to do okay. She really does care about them. There's a reason they want to go with her. There's a reason they feel so connected to her. She wants the best for them. And this is not the best for Ruth, certainly not from Naomi's point of view. She's going back to poverty. Ruth is a widow. She keeps on, and Ruth keeps on pointing out that she is not actually from Israel or from Judah. She keeps on pointing, Ruth is very aware of this. I am a foreigner. And that also is going to be it's going to be very hard for Ruth. And they have no money, and they're two women, right? This is going to be really hard. And from her point of view, go back to your mother in Moab and find another husband. That's the best thing for you, right? And I think that that's part of it, that she genuinely cares and wants the best for them. This certainly does not seem to be the best for Ruth, despite the fact that Ruth is so determined to do it. Okay, so and the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And when they got to Bethlehem, the whole city kind of gathered in like a crowd around them. But Tomarna Hazot Nomi, and the women said, we know it's the women because of the form of the verb, right? It's just because just and they said, but it's the form of the verb is plural. So, and the women said, "Is this Naomi?" Right? And she said, but Tomar Lehen, which Al tikrena li Naomi, krena li mara, ki hemar shadai li mod. So she said to them, don't call me Naomi, like pleasant, right? Call me bitter, because God has been very bitter to me. Right? Or God has, God has caused a lot of bitterness for me. Ani mleah halachti, v'rekam hashiva mi Adonai, lama tikrena li Naomi, v'Adonai anavi v'shadai hirav. I went full, and God returned me empty. Why should you call me Naomi when God has tormented me? And you say that the Lord has tormented me, and God has caused evil to me, has brought misfortune on me. And again, it's very reminiscent of Job saying, it's God has brought this disaster upon me. Vatashav Naomi Ruth Moaviyach Laita Ima Hashava Mistei Moav. And so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who came back, who returned from the field of Moab. Vehema ba'u Bethlehem b'tchilat ksir sa'orim, and they came to Bethlehem. In the beginning of the barley harvest, and this is the end of this chapter. And yes, okay, these chapters are the Christian chapters according to the Christian, but they actually follow the units, right? This is the end of a unit. We're going to go next into introducing Boaz, right? But already in this verse, Naomi set up a problem here, where she's like, God, I left full, and God brought me back empty. Her hopelessness comes out. She's like, all I have now is bitterness. And the hope we have all in this verse. So Naomi returned, and they arrived at the beginning of the barley harvest. And this is kind of the glimmer. Everything now is going to happen through the harvest, right? The whole story is going to be working through this harvest. They're going to get food through this harvest, and all the major actions of the going down to the threshing floor. It's all going to happen through the harvest. The fact that they're at the beginning of the harvest, and again, the beginning of the harvest also expresses God, the fact that God remembered His people and brought them bread. Right? There's a harvest now. This is the beginning of these are new beginnings, and now in the barley harvest, what seemed hopeless is going to turn to fruitfulness. And again, this is what connects us very clearly to the festival of Shavuot, right? Which the idea is that here we are in the barley harvest. This is the season, and of course later on, the idea that this is the time when the Torah is given, and Ruth herself says, your people are my people and your God is my God, and accepts this upon herself, where she becomes a symbol of kind of the perfect convert, right? The perfect person who joins the people of Israel. Questions. And if there are no questions, I have a little bit more to say, but it can wait till next time.
Well, I asked how come, isn't it strange that during the 10 years in which Naomi was with Ruth and Orpah, they didn't have any kids, or maybe the kids are not mentioned?
I mean, it's clear they didn't have any kids, and it is a little strange. Yeah. I mean, it's funny that it's not mentioned as, I do think that is kind of the opening, and again, the story is connected to Yibum, right? The story is, I'm stopping my share for a second so I can see the chat. The story is connected to the idea of Yibum, and that it happens why does Ruth need? Why is Ruth even connected to the redemption of the field at all? There is no child. There is no child to carry on the names of these men. If you say, isn't it strange that they weren't able to have children? I mean, infertility was it's still a problem, but certainly in ancient times, it was a tremendous problem because there was pretty much nothing to do about it, right? And we see that throughout biblical stories. We have many stories with women who cannot have a child. And we have it in not just in biblical stories. If you look at ancient documents, you will see many cases where there's a couple where they're adopting someone because they have no child and they want someone who's going to look after them in their old age. In return, they'll inherit the property, their money or whatever. And so you have that. That's not. Obviously, you need this for the story to happen, right?
The story makes the last three sentences don't make sense to me. First, they're greeted by the women. They're greeted by these women when they come to the town. And then the last sentence says, and Naomi came back. It's like the author's talking again.
Yes,
it's like back and forth. It was like
talking, right?
It's very strange, those last three
because
sentences.
You're closing a scene. It's showing you, it's very much a, I say edited work. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone wrote it and someone came along and edited it. It can mean that, but in this case, what I mean is this is a structured work. This isn't someone sitting and writing some stream of consciousness, right? There's a structure to it. There are scenes, right? This is the end of, let's say, the first scene. There was the women came. You saw how low Naomi is, and again, Naomi is absolutely like the person who we feel with in this chapter, where we saw how Naomi has no hope. She had to say to her daughters-in-law, she expressed to them how she thinks she's cursed by God. She expresses, she says to them, can I still have a child? I can't. And we realize this is a woman who just lost her 2 sons, right? She lost her children. She's got nothing. She's like, can I still have a child? I can't. Just leave me. I've been cursed. And then these women come and they say, is this Naomi? And yeah, okay, you can say, oh, they're flabbergasted. Well, they haven't seen her in 10 years. If I met someone who I hadn't seen in 10 years, this actually happened recently. I saw someone I hadn't seen in 10 years. And she said, is this Miriam? I would have been like, yeah, I'm here, right? Yeah, I came back. But she automatically takes it, and maybe it's meant to be taken, right? As, yeah, boy, I have changed because I have lost everything and I am miserable. I had everything and now I have nothing, right? So this, and I will say briefly, I see there are a bunch of questions and comments, and I'm going to return and I'm going to go over them. But Uriel Simon, and I may even repeat this again later because it's such a great, Uriel Simon, in his kind of talk on Ruth that he gives on Shavuot. So he says that the whole point is that the tremendous kindness and the unbelievable kindness that people show, that Ruth shows to Naomi, that Boaz shows to Ruth, etc., in the book makes the impossible possible, because Naomi starts the book saying, I cannot have a son. Right, I cannot have a child. And at the end of the book, the women who said, is this Naomi, say a son has been born to Naomi. So the idea that this tremendous kindness can make the impossible, what seems impossible, she has no hope. And at the end, what she said there's absolutely no chance of happens, right? At least the book sets it up that way. And the people who are acknowledging it happens are those same women, right? Are the women who greeted her and said, is this Naomi? And at the end, they're like, you have a son, right? And Ruth is better for you than your text. It's like, and Ruth is like, so you have this, they're kind of a chorus that's telling you this is what's going on. So we had a scene that shows how low Naomi has fallen. And then we have a verse saying, yes, in fact, Naomi has returned with her daughter-in-law, a Moabite, and they are now back, right? And it's the beginning of the harvest. There's hope. There's a start of hope there. There's a start of what's going to allow everything to change. So thank you. I'm just going to look at the some of the comments. Yeah, just a second, because I see there are a whole bunch of comments that people wrote in that I didn't address. So let me just address those quickly. We'll come to your question. So Daniel Levy said you'd expect that Naomi would have had some grandchildren. Oh, right, after 10 years. Yeah, so you go ask that. So I think, again, for the story, we need there to be no kids. I mean, that's part of it. And that's kind of the main thing. She's gone for a significant amount of time that you can to understand why the sons would say, okay, we're going to make a life here in Moab. And then she really, and that gave time for her to like really lose everything. Now, Moshe asks, why does Naomi tell Orpah and Ruth to return to their mother's houses rather than their father's houses? I presume that Moab wasn't a matriarchal society. I also presume that because I don't think there's any evidence of any matriarchal society ever. Matrilineal, yes. Matriarchal, no. Because in a matrilineal society, it's the mother's brother who's kind of the head of the family. But no, right, it wasn't the matriarchal society. I think because our focus is so much on women. I think the focus is on women, and it's almost emphasizing how much our focus is on the women and how Naomi is thinking women, and she's like, go back to your mother's houses. And I also think that it's saying you have mothers, perhaps more. She's like, they're saying because she's like, you have mothers. Like, you're my daughters, but you have mothers. You have a mother to go to. You don't need me, right? And that possibly is the stronger reason. So Stephen says, Ruth was in a religious household for 10 years in which she decided that Judaism is the true religion, and she stuck with it through thick and thin. Well, I like that. It's nice. That's nice. And I mean, it's interesting because the way it always struck me how she expresses it to Naomi, because the way she describes it to Naomi is really, I am not leaving you. Your nation is my nation. Your God is my God. But the way she speaks immediately does show that she's like, I swear by God, blah, blah, blah. Like, in other words, she's very kind of she has absolutely kind of adopted the idea that the God that is important is the God of Israel, right? That's the God that you swear by. That's the God you automatically invoke. So certainly you have that aspect. So he does, yeah, so that's he does question being said. Susan says, ironic that Naomi and Elimelech and family left the house of bread to find food amongst the Moabites, who are infamous in the Torah for refusing to provide food to the Israelites. Yes, it is ironic. Very good. It's a nice point. Yeah, so the Lechem, house of bread, it is ironic they go to the Moabites, who are famous for not providing food. That's a good point. I like that. Stephen, Naomi states she left full, but in fact, Elimelech and Naomi left because they didn't have even bread to eat. That shows that what Naomi cares about is her family, right? I mean, she cares about, of course, she wants to have food to eat, right? She left full because she had a husband and 2 sons, and she's coming back empty because she doesn't have a husband and 2 sons, right? It's less about the money, even though for certainly the money is a question because she needs to eat. And she doesn't know how. Like, she doesn't know. Like, it's literally the role of the state of a widow. It will find that she has property to sell. Okay, Moshe says, regarding the significance of the harvest of next Shavuot, but the barley harvest is at Pesach time, not Shavuot. Well, I mean, it continues on. I mean, we've got the Omers lasting, right? So it's this time of year. It's the wheat harvest too, if that helps. Stephen, I'm also troubled by the timeline. Were both sons married at the beginning of the 10 years, and then they both died towards the end of the 10 years? It seems like that. It seems like they died at the beginning of the 10 years, and then they died. They both got married around the same time. They both died around the same time. What caused this tragedy? We do not know. Okay, I'm 1 minute over, but are there any other comments or questions?
I was just saying that if Ruth is to be viewed as a response to Ezra, you'd expect that the language and the style of writing would be similar to the style of writing that you find in Ezra and Nehemiah and the Hebrew parts of Daniel and in Esther, but rather the style of writing and the language are very much the style of the Nevi'im, of Yehoshua through Malachim.
I don't think it's a response to the book of Ezra or the book of Nehemiah. I think it's a response to an approach, right? That's, I think, what the difference is. I think you've got people with different approaches to what it means to have a foreign woman who's married to an Israelite or Judite man. Like, is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a neutral thing? Is it something that we must nip in the bud? right? Is it something that cannot be good? Or could it be okay, right? I think that's the difference. And you have, and I don't think it's a response to the book. I think it's a response, there's an argument going on, right? Now it depends on when this is written, because you could put it much like it's the actual thing of saying, okay, you're married to foreign women, you've got to kind of kick them all out. I mean, what we read about it in is really Persian, specifically kind of a specific period of like in the Persian period, like under Ezra and under Nehemiah. So that's still a long range in the Persian period, but like it's and then the question is, okay, so is that what's going on here? It certainly does seem to, at the very least, be presenting a woman who is a foreign woman who is wholeheartedly accepted, right? The people of Israel, the God of Israel, right? That's a big part of it. It's not like, oh, she's shallowly doing this stuff and now we should accept her. It's that, look, here's a woman who is accepting everything. And it really is like, I don't disagree with this idea like of her as the first convert, like that's the idea, because she's saying, I accept everything, and she's constantly talking like she accepts the way the way everything works in this culture, the way the beliefs, the rules, and God, which is always like on everyone's lips in this book, right? Everyone's blessing each other with God. Like this is what she is taking on, right? Wholeheartedly. And then she's like this tremendous, wonderful, not just a person in her own right, but she's better to Naomi than sons. She's the foremother of David, of the best king, right? Or depending on how you look at it, right? She becomes so important because she's a true member of the people, because she becomes a true member of the Jewish people, and that's it seems, and it does seem to be why are you telling us this? Like, why is this important? Why do we need to know this? It does seem to be arguing with this idea that no, you can't have someone like that. Like that's not a possible thing. And that what we see in Ezra and Nehemiah is this kind of like, okay, anyone who's married to a foreign wife with your little kids, with your foreign kids, just send them away. It's like, hey, there's no way it's okay. There's no way out. There's no way this is all right. You got to send them away. And so that's a different, and this is a different opinion, saying, look at this woman, right? She is clearly an asset to the Jewish people, right? So I think that's the idea. It's an idea, an argument, a polemic, as it were, in terms of ideas, rather than responding to the book specifically. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Oh, how do you think, I mean, Naomi comes back, Ruth is standing right next to her, and she says to everyone in the city, I came back empty. She doesn't introduce Ruth. Maybe we only see later on how Ruth is feeling when Boaz is so good to her and she responds positively. But, Ruth, I mean, that's a terrible thing to say. I came back empty, and here she's given up Ruth.
I think that I'm very sympathetic to Naomi here. I'll admit it. She lost her sons. I mean, she doesn't know what the story is going to be with Ruth. Like, she told Ruth to leave. She doesn't see a bright future for Ruth. She doesn't. And she from her point of view, she lost everything. A daughter-in-law is not two sons. And I'm sure she appreciates Ruth, but I don't know if she would assume that Ruth is going to stay with her, right? Yes, Ruth promised to stay with her, but she doesn't have that promise. And I do think that this whole chapter is kind of setting up just how hopeless Naomi is. Naomi sees no hope. And the time she sees hope is when Boaz starts being kind to Ruth. She's like, oh, you know who Boaz is, right? And then Naomi starts doing things because Ruth takes the initiative in the beginning. And Naomi only takes the initiative when she starts seeing kindness from Boaz. Because then she's like, oh, wait, this could all work out, right? So I think the whole thing is kind of showing just how hopeless she is. And I don't think we're supposed to like necessarily say, well, but Ruth is standing right there. She doesn't know, like she doesn't know. And you know, and the fact that Boaz praises Ruth, like, oh, you're so wonderful, you didn't go after any of the young men. That is actually what you would expect Ruth to do. Okay, she's staying with Naomi, and then after months, a nice guy comes along and says, hey, marry me, and then she's off, and you know, that's it, Naomi's alone again, right? Like that's what you would normally, for a normal person, you would expect that to kind of happen. But Ruth, who was tremendously kind and everything, right? She doesn't do that. And again, Naomi wants the best for Ruth, and it's not clear what their future is going to be. Susan made a nice point. She said Naomi sent her daughters-in-law back to their mothers because she empathized with the grief of a mother losing children. It's a very nice idea, Susan. So if there's nothing else, thank you all for joining me. I hope to see you next week. Yes.
You don't have time to tell us what you were saying about the Maggid, do you?
Oh, sure. Anyone who wants to say can hear the story of the Maggid. So I'm just going to do the official. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I will see you next week as we continue. And looking forward to seeing you. Same link, same bat time, same bat channel. Okay, great. And the Dubner Maggid story goes like this. Okay, so you have to see the verses. Just a second. Let me get the verses up on the screen. I have to go back here. I have to get to the right one. Just a second. Okay. Sharing my screen. Okay, so the Dubner Maggid said, I will tell you the question in a story and the answer in a story. Okay, so it says, because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt, and because you're seeing the right screen, right? You're seeing the verses. So because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt, and because they hired Bilam, son of Beor, from Petor of Aram to curse you. And he's like, what's the question? It's like someone, a man went, you know, a man was busy with his business, and he sent his son with a shipment to go, the son with the mother, with his wife, to go and sell things in the market. And it's time for them to come back. The son comes running in and he says, Dad, I have terrible news. Robbers came, they just stole everything. They took all of the merchandise, and also they killed Mom. And he's like, you idiots, start with the important thing. Your mother's the important thing. Why didn't you tell me that at first? What kind of son do I have? So that's the question here. It's like, what do you mean? They did not meet you with food and water. Start with the guy they hired to curse you. That's the really bad thing. Why are you starting with the food and water they didn't give you? And the answer is, there's a young man, the yeshiva, he's the best learner. And so this rich man comes and he says, listen, if this young man marries my daughter, food's on me, I will feed him through his yeshiva learning. The Rosh Yeshiva says, great, wonderful, we'll make the match. So they make the match, and he sees the young married man. He looks terrible. He's falling asleep on his Gemara, or he's so weak. He's like, what's going on? He says to the young man, he says, what happened? And the young man says to him, he says, you know, I'm very delicate, you know, I sit and learn all day, and I can't eat just anything. And I go, and my father-in-law, who's supposed to give me meals, I come there, and it's hard black bread and like a little piece of herring, and I can't eat it. And if I won't eat it, he has these two big guys, and they beat me up until I eat it. And I can't keep it down, and I'm weak, and it's just terrible. And the Rosh says, this is horrible. So he goes to the father-in-law. He says, what is this? You said you had money and you could support this young man. He's like, listen, I'm really sorry. I thought I had the money, but my business has fallen on hard times, and I just can't afford to feed this young man like he would be accustomed. And he says, okay, so you only have money for the black bread and the little piece of herring. He's like, but where's the money coming from that you're using the guys to beat him up? How are you paying them if you can't afford some white bread for the kid? Right? So that's the thing, is like, so you say, well, we didn't give you food and water because we didn't have money for food and water. So we didn't have food and water to spare. Ah, but you had money to hire Bilam. So that's the Dubner Maggid thing. It's just cute. It's, you know, a story for everything. Anyway, so thanks for joining me, everyone, and I'll see you next week.